Yeah.
And he told you, if it's important, you do it every day. And so,
Every day.
yeah. And so let's start there because we were talking about, it was kind of leading us to one of the points that we had, which is like, are you teaching or training?
Yeah.
Are you like, are we teaching people how to be disciples, or are we just running practice from first whistle to last whistle so we can be done?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so let's start there.
So, and that was the deal with Chasen was, and like I said, he we've talked about this multiple times, and he doesn't even remember making the comment,
Mm,
of like, hey, if it's
mhm,
important, you do it every day. But that's something that has just been etched in my mind because, you know, we forget that the most important relationship that we have is with Christ and with the Holy Spirit and with the Father, and that's a daily thing, and it has to be something that we make time for every day. And I've not been perfect with that in my life, but to go and spend time with them and to make um, the effort to be with them and build that relationship is important. And when we did that with our teams and we focused on, the character development is what we called it, but really it's a intentional time to build a relationship with
mhm,
them. and
mhm,
and that's where you go from, hey, we're just going through these drills to get better at these skills, or we're lifting these weights because they make us stronger or whatever. Those are the things that make it to where it relates to the important part. This is where we're making disciples, not just players, not just whatever. And so I felt like, when we made a dedication to the character development, that even if we didn't get anything else done that day, that is something that we are allotting our time for. It made a drastic change on who we were, not just as a team, but as a program, because we went from being this team that was talented and this team that could do certain things, but what is the sustainability going to be, and what
mhm,
is our program truly built upon, to, hey, we're here to just make better people,
mhm,
and the cool thing about that is, we were coaching in a district that had multiple junior highs, multiple schools, and so a lot of times, and we live in an area where people want to move to. I think Arkansas was one of the top states in the last year uh, for people to move into.
mhm,
In our area specifically, there's always an influx of growth, and we had a family come, and one of our assistant principals pulls me aside and goes, Coach Pearson, you're going to give this family their tour of the building, and we expect you to show all the aspects of our school, the culture that we have here. But they've said this multiple times. They're going to be dictating where their children goes to school based on the football program. So that's why you're the one giving the tour. And that happened multiple times
mhm,
during my stint there. But that was kind of the first time. And he kind of told me that morning, and the tour was going to be that afternoon. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, oh, golly, I mean, we don't we've had some success, but, like, we're still a very fledgling program. There's all these things that we need and all the things that could be better, and then some of the things that don't look good right now, and all the things, and what do we have that other programs don't have, and how do we compare, and I was just running through all these different scenarios in my brain about, like, how inadequate we are.
mhm,
And finally it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I said, you know what, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to do this tour. And what ended up happening was, the dad couldn't make it for some work stuff, which was why they were moving to the area. Was dad got a new job, and the mom had come in and she was going to take the tour, and take her on the tour and show her all the things, library, cafeteria, the grounds,
mhm,
all science, English departments, all the things, football areas and stuff, and basically, it came down to the last bit of the tour, and I said, they've told me that you guys said that you're going to make your decision based on the football program. And I said, We haven't been here as long as some of the other programs in the area. And honestly, I don't know what the other programs do. And that's kind of on purpose. I don't want to dictate what we do based off of them. I want to do what makes us better. But here's what I can tell you. I don't know what they do, and I don't know how they treat kids or whatever. But what I can tell you, and I can promise you this, we're going to love your kid. If he comes to Grimsley, we're going to love your kid, and we're going to do our very best to make him the man that he's supposed to be when he grows up. And, you know, I'm not saying that you need to always sell it like that, but that's how I felt. And I felt like that was what the Lord, that was the what our program was needing to be based on. And they ended up coming to Grimsley, and he was part of a team that was, that focal point was building good people. And they ended up being very talented and being able to win a conference championship while we were there. But I don't think that if I had sold it as, well, we're going to win conference championships and we're going to be competitive and have good football programs, I don't think that they would have necessarily came. I think that, the mom and their family made the decision based upon, we decided to care about their kids and invest in their kids as who they are as people. That way, when they go and leave us, they go and make the world a better place, like Jesus is asking the disciples to do.
That's the point I wanted that we were really establishing there is, are you teaching or are you training? And I heard someone recently who described the difference in these two so succinctly. Teaching involves listening, training involves talking.
Yeah.
So, if you were just training that kid to be a better football player, to win championships, then you would just coach whistle to whistle and not listen to, what do these parents want for their child? What does that child want for themselves? What does this child need to be the man that they're going to be in 10, 15,
Yeah.
20 years?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that parallels to, like you mentioned earlier, I think before we even started, was, are we developing disciples or just trying to convert people to Christianity?
Yeah.
Such a vast difference. And it's so parallel to those two things.
Yeah.
You're teaching or you're training. And especially for coaches who we rely on our faith as the foundation of our coaching and our purpose, we got to be teachers, right?
Yeah.
Not just of the game, but of the gospel.
Yeah. And that's what's great about the Great Commission is that, Jesus asked us to teach them to obey everything I command you. And that, as a teacher and a coach, that, was like, whoa, like Jesus specifically mentions our profession in the Great Commission to teach. And just like what you were saying, like there's some give and take there. Teaching is not just, hey, I'm going to communicate what I want out of this and then you go do it. There's always mistakes and miss-ups and tries again and second chances and teaching requires the relationship, and that's what is always the focal point. When we have professional development, it's almost like a cliche sometimes, and people hate to hear it, but it does go back down to the relationship that is built, and until you have built that, it's hard to actually teach somebody what to do
Mm-hmm.
because you're always trying to bridge this interpersonal gap of trust and caring and loving and all of those sorts of things. And it's great that I think it's great that the Lord says teaching them, not commanding them, not whatever. It puts the emphasis on there being a relationship and there having to be second chances.
Mm-hmm. I spoke on leadership with in a professional development last summer, and it was me and another coach from a different campus in our district, and a couple of other people from just other entities in the school, and then what leadership looks like in our different realms. We were talking to a room full of teachers and coaches and administrators, and we're talking about how we how we address leadership and leadership development specifically in the kids that we have. And then it dawned on me, I don't know, somewhere in the middle, everything started sounding like white noise, you know,
Yeah.
and I began to look at the faces of everybody. And, you know, there are a couple of people jotting things down, but some of them started to check out. And I thought, oh my gosh, this just turned into your typical PD. And
Yeah.
so when the person speaking finished what they were saying, I said, here's the thing that no one has said to you yet. And I'm going to tell it to you right now. We could stop right now. And if all you got was what I'm about to tell you, then we've done what we were supposed to do. I said, you can't lead anybody if you don't care about every kid that walks in your room.
Yeah.
I told them leadership starts with the relationship you have with every single kid. If you're a coach, it's every kid that walks in, not the all-star, you know, every
Yeah.
single one. And if you know anything else from this, it's you got to serve every single one of them. And
Yeah.
you got to develop trust with them and a relationship with them, and you better love the heck out of them. And if you don't, then you're not a leader because that's not leading,
Yeah.
you know? And
Well, and
so,
even if so there were times, and we would have so many kids, it felt like I felt like we had just kids everywhere. And and I would tell our kids like every kid that's a part of our program, and especially like you get those seventh and eighth graders, they come in, they haven't seen a lot of men tell them I love them or like they
mhm,
love them,
right.
and then even fewer of them have seen that and then haven't back it up. Having men in their lives back this up every day. And so, you get these, especially like outside of your immediate family. I mean, there's a lot of them that have good fathers, good dads, and men who have stepped up in their lives and stuff, but some of them don't. And so I said, if you're going to be a part of our program, I'm going to choose to love you, and I'm going to tell you, you
Mhm,
know, um, because I remember being that age, and you tell somebody you love them and they don't say it back or they don't say it, like it does some things to you mentally, because you're trying to find out who you are as a person and as a young man, and you're trying to grow into, who you're supposed to be. And without that love and that support, it's very difficult to find, the right path. And there's a million other things trying to influence them
mm,
on what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what they're supposed to be. And so if you don't have that strong Christian male figure, that mentoree discipleship relationship, it can be difficult. And so I would get these looks from these kids. I'd be like, all right, that's great work today, and all that kind of good stuff. All right, love you, see you, bye. And as they're leaving, hey, love you. And like some of them just look at you, big eyes, and they don't say anything. But
yeah.
now 4, 5, 6 years later, it's like I'm seeing kids at Ace Hardware come up to me, Coach Pearson, big bear hug, almost break me in half because they're grown men now, and like, tell me about their lives, and then leave it with, "Hey, Coach, I love you." And they beat me to the punch. These same kids that looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my head when I told them I loved them the first time, they beat you to the punch because you invested in their lives and proved to them that you loved them. But
Mhm.
there are times too, it's like you got 180 some kids in there that you're choosing to love, and one more kid shows up, and you're like, I don't know how much more I got left in me. Like, I don't know. There, no matter what, this kid comes, and that's what's great, when you feel like there's nothing left. And that kind of leads us into the last part of verse 20. And uh there's so many times as a coach where you think to yourself, I don't have anything left. I have nothing left
Mhm,
that I can
mhm,
give either to the program or to this kid or this family or to my family or whatever. Jesus tells us, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And that is so uplifting to me in those times when I don't have anything left, to know that I can reach out and he's right there. And
mhm,
I can lean into him, even if it's just that, hey man, just take 5 minutes and just be quiet and be still and be in that presence, and then figure out a way to get it done.
yeah,
I mean, there's so many times, whether it be after a loss or after a great win, and everybody else goes home, and there's still laundry to be done. You go home, the trash still has to get taken out, and you're thinking to yourself, I am this one coach, that I've done these things, and I still got to take out my own trash. It's just there's always these moments in coaching where whether things are good or whether things are bad, like the world is still the world,
Mhm.
and we still need him in those moments, whether you're at the bottom of the bottoms or the highs of the highs or the crazy swings of coaching that fit in between, you know.
These are the things that no one tells young coaches when their hair is on fire right out of college and they get their first job, and they got a whistle and they get their new gear for their school, and they're even halfway excited to go to PD. And nobody tells you
Yeah.
the stories. Like, I went to this was several years ago, the year we won a state championship. In fact, 2022, we went down to a rival school, and if we win, we're probably going to win the conference. And had beaten them at home handily, and give up a goal in the last minute or two that we accidentally knocked in. So we scored on ourselves with a minute or two. Yeah. So I'm salty about that because we had missed at least 3 game winners from 6 feet away. And
Yeah.
I'm talking about All Americans missing
Yeah.
from 6 feet away. And so it's one of those nights.
Yeah.
We get home. We played the late game, so we're getting home 10:30, 11, and get in my truck, and I pull out of the parking lot. I'm salty anyway, right?
Uh-huh.
And I got a flat tire.
No.
So now
Oh.
I'm in the parking lot changing my flat tire. It's 11:30, becoming midnight by
Mm-hmm.
the time I get actually on the road. But I look back at when the year was over. Of course, you're sitting on top. The way we finished that year. And I look back on that, I thought, man, I'm so thankful for that flat tire, because had I walked in my house after that loss, I wouldn't have had time to cool off. You
Yeah.
know, was I upset about the flat tire? Yes, but it distracted me from all of the doubt
Yeah.
and fear. Like, now we don't have, maybe we won't get a bye. Maybe we got to play 3 playoff games. What's our seeding going to be? And, you begin to question everything that you've done so far. You know how that feels. And
Yeah.
that flat tire completely distracted me from all of that,
Yeah.
you know? And,
Yeah. Because it's like, hey, if I don't get this done, I don't get to go home.
right.
And
Right.
it kind of it simplifies and refocuses you, and
Yeah.
it kind of helps you remember that it's not the biggest thing in the world,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
He's with us.
and
He's with us even until the end of the age. His ways are not
yeah,
our ways. That flat tire refocused me, and
yeah,
there was that doesn't make any sense whatsoever unless you you know
yeah,
unless you completely believe that passage, that his yoke is easy and his burden is light.
yeah, yeah. And that's I think too, it's in a lot of ways having moments like that, it really brings into perspective, you know, how all of those things that we feel like in the moment with our sports and our programs, they feel so big.
Mhm.
I mean, we live and die in these moments, and then flat tire, it brings you back down to earth, and you realize like, you know, that's a little thing to us in the grand scheme of things.
Mhm.
When you talk about like going into your home and you have the relationships with your wife and your children and your family and the atmosphere that you try to create as a father and as a husband, but then also like how little are all these things to the Lord when it comes to it, and how damaging we can be in our own small minds about when we go into those environments with ourselves on our minds instead of what we're called to be in those environments. And there's always things that we have anxiety and we worry about. But it just it means so much to those who are around us when we can be what we're called to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't do that if we're focused on us. And when our purpose is to shine his light and make those disciples, what we have to remember too is it's like, hey, we're just an instrument. He's supposed to just radiate through us. And those times that we don't have it at 11 o'clock midnight, and bad loss, flat tire, like that kind of gives you some time to be peaceful with the Lord, I think, you
Mm-hmm.
know, instead of dwelling upon what is us, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I listened to a pastor this week, and he was talking about how we're not supposed to dwell on things, and I think it was a misinterpretation of the proverb that we get, don't let the sun go down on anger. And it's because you stew on it and you worry about it, and it builds up into this bigger thing than it actually is. And um, and I don't necessarily, and I think where it gets misinterpreted is like, oh, we got to settle it before we go to bed. I don't think that that's necessarily true all the time, because I've never seen an argument or situation get better the more tired you get.
Yeah, right.
So I think a lot of times some sleep and some food would make things a little bit better. But what that means is like we don't need to dwell in those negative places,
Mm-hmm.
that especially the ones where we focus on ourselves and not what God has called us to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. I love that you said use the word dwell right there, because as coaches, we can't dwell on the losses and the things, that the negativity that creeps into our minds. Um, and at the same time, we have to exemplify how to move on from
Yeah,
those kind of
yeah,
things to our kids, because, if there were an epidemic of mental health issues right now in the realm of athletics, boy, that is one, is that kids struggle to be resilient because they can't move on from mistakes and failure.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I see that. I have seen that becoming slowly over my 20 plus years. I've seen that become worse and worse and worse, just year after year, inch by inch, becoming a bigger issue for kids to overcome, you know. And so
mhm,
now you have tragedies resulting,
yeah,
because of some of these things. And as a coach, I'm so thankful that I get to coach my daughter in both soccer and powerlifting. But I had a chance to be a coach yesterday and not just a dad for her.
yeah,
Um, she missed on a lift, and her total was high enough that as long as she doesn't bomb out, as long as she doesn't zero on deadlift, she's going to win a state championship. And so she is upset because she missed on a lift that she's made a dozen times in our garage.
yeah,
And she comes to me and she's, really upset. And I just sat there with her. I didn't say anything. I just sat there with her and letting her know I'm here. I'm here in your upset, in this upset space of yours. And when you're ready, then we can talk about it, when I'm right
yeah,
here with you. And so she got to a point where she was kind of ready to talk about it. And I said, I don't even want to talk about that one. And you can't dwell on it. I said, but first you got to give yourself permission to move past it. I said, now
yeah,
on the car ride home, if you want to dwell about it, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. and maybe even dose it with some good ice cream. But
Yeah, that's right. Food,
which can't
food
go
and a
on.
nap makes a lot of things
Yeah,
better.
right. It's just seems
Just
like an
ask
angel
Jonah.
said that to someone, was it?
That's right.
And so I said, the next lift is the most important lift of the entire day. Maybe you know what?
Yeah.
Of the year. Of the year.
Yeah. How are you going to respond?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
we
there's
have
so many opportunities in athletics to
mhm,
model that for our athletes. Things don't go right. How do we show them to carry on?
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and that's great that you were able to, you know, hey, I'm gonna. And there's sometimes like you can't make it better. Things are just bad,
Right.
and it's
No.
just to sit in there with them with the empathy that you have and the love that you have with them. Sometimes things are hard,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
at some point you do get to like, hey, there's a response here, and in
Yeah.
powerlifting, like you guys, it's like, hey, we got about 4 minutes that we can kind of think about it, and then
Mhm,
we got to move on because in 5 more minutes there's going to be another lift, and we got to be ready to
mhm,
go.
mhm.
You know, so that's awesome. So how did you sitting in that with her kind of help her to reset for the next lift?
I think the biggest part was, I think she may have been worried that I was disappointed, you
Yeah,
know, and by just smiling at her, and putting my arm on her shoulder, you know, I let her know it's all right. We're all gonna fail.
yeah,
Like, damn, I never seen a red light. Come on,
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah,
know, you know. But I could feel her get lighter after
yeah,
she was able to kind of vent the emotion of the moment. You know, she got
yeah,
lighter. And she was ready to receive again. You know, and and that's when I told her, I know you're upset, but we can talk about it later, and we can get back in the garage, we can fix things, but you can't think about that right now. Like,
yeah.
let's be
Because you got
honest.
another lift coming.
Right. I said, let's be
The
honest.
world's gonna keep spinning.
That's right. But what it did for her was just let her know that nobody's disappointed in her. You know, it's okay. It's
Mhm.
okay to fail. And that's why I just kept reiterating, the next thing you do is
Yeah,
the most important thing you do.
and like that's teaching. You know, see, there's gonna be mistakes. There's gonna be things that happen,
Mhm.
and it's okay. That didn't go how we planned for it to go, but there's gonna be things that we can fix. And so early in my career, I worked for this guy named David Beal, and he was the junior high head coach at this place I was working, and that it was his hometown there in Russellville where we were working in. But the cool thing about Coach Bill, he had been a Texas high school coach and won a state championship in Texas, but he was also the special teams coordinator when Texas A&M started doing the 12th man, where they
Mhm.
started bringing in all the walk-ons and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And
That's awesome.
so, yeah, I mean, it was just and he was just this wealth of knowledge and I probably bugged the mess out of him. We would go to these Friday night games and we would drive a vehicle to the games, and I would sleep before the game. We'd get in there and get in the back of his Chevy uh, SUV, and I would sleep all the way to the game. And the other coaches would talk, and they'd be talking about the next week or the night before's game and all that kind of stuff. And then on the way home, they would sleep, and I would sit in the passenger's seat, and I would ask him question after question about Texas high school football and players he had had and situations he had been involved with and all these things. But one of the things that I remember is we went to go play Valonia one time, and I remember, things in that game, it was very contested and things didn't really go how we wanted them to go. And I honestly I don't remember if we won or we lost that game, but I remember him saying, Dalton, we can't and we got to stop yelling and we got to start teaching
Mhm.
the game. And it wasn't necessarily directed specifically at me, but I took that to heart in a lot of ways because how I grew up, you weren't necessarily understood by what you said, but the decibels you created, and you were normally, if you were the loudest one, you were the one that was heard. And so I said, I don't really understand that. And he said, Dalton, our kids don't know the game and they don't know how to respond to what is going on out there. We can't assume that they do.
Mhm.
Yelling doesn't fix that. You have to teach them the game, and that's the part of athletics and sports where that's transitional.
Mhm.
Because if you can teach and you've been modeled, this is how you teach, then not only are we building relationships with our kids, we're teaching them how to build healthy relationships in life with their peers, with their coworkers, with their employers, with their children, with their spouses, because that right there is transitional to any part of their lives.
Mhm.
Um,